All right, hello everybody. We're going to talk about Unit 7, which is Industrial and Economic Development. Section 2, Economic Sectors and Patterns. And I'm going to do this with a story. So the learning objective is to explain the spatial patterns of industrial production and development. And what that means is, where's that at around the world? So where do they do each of the 5 main economic sectors? Okay. And I'll explain all those through a story, and then I'll show you a little video that has the map in it. Okay, so our essential knowledge here is we got to have the different economic sectors, including primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and quinary. Okay, and depending on which one of those 5 you do mainly in your country is either developed or developing. Depends on what you do. It depends on where your country's at. So labor, transportation, including shipping containers, which you'll see as well. The break of bulk, that's a big one here. The least cost theory, markets and resources influence the location of manufacturing. So where you're going to put your plant depends upon A, what you're going to make, B, how much it's going to cost, and C, what's it going to weigh, because you have to transport it. Okay, one way, shape, or form. Okay, so then we're all going to talk about how that goes through core, semi-periphery, and periphery locations. Okay, so the 5 economic sectors. I'm going to do this with a story about my dad who worked in the railroad. Okay, so we all seen railroad cars go by. So let's say that there is a cornfield, right? I couldn't think of corn. A cornfield. So the cornfield grows, right? There's a farmer that's got machinery, right, that plays into our 5th agriculture, the Unit 5, the 5th the agricultural unit. So they deal with the earth. So people that deal with the earth and raw materials, farmers, coal miners, whatever that could be, those people, right, they are in primary economic activities. Okay, so in America, like 2% of our people are farmers, probably less than that. Okay, 2% deal with the earth, deal with raw materials. We are a very developed country, arguably the most developed country in the world. Okay, so if you go the opposite end of that and you have a country where a large percentage of the people are farmers, they're in the primary economic activity, so then they're going to be in the developing world. Okay, they're going to be in the periphery countries, not the core countries. Okay, so that corn is grown. Farmers got to do something with it. It's got to sell it somewhere, right? So somebody somewhere works in a factory. So the railroad's job, that's where my dad worked, the railroad's job was to take that corn from the farmer, ship it to a factory in Minnesota, right? And in Minnesota, the name of the place escapes me, but it's where all the cereal's made. That place, we're going to pause. That corn is shipped off to Battle Creek, Michigan, right? So in Battle Creek, Michigan, there's a bunch of plants where they're going to take factories where they're going to take that corn and produce cereal, whether it's cornflakes or whether it's honeycombs or whatever it is they're going to make. Okay, that's what they do in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Okay, all right. So that's a secondary job because they're making a product. They're taking that raw material and they're making something out of it. Now I'm using food as an example, but it could be lumber. It could be, that was a tree, forestry would be the primary, and then you take it out and make the lumber. That's a second, sawmill. That's a secondary job, right? So if you have secondary things, your country is probably in the periphery. It could be in the semi-periphery, and you of course have to have these things in core countries as well. But it depends on percentages, right? If all of your stuff is a secondary economic activity, which that would be impossible, but you're probably in the periphery or the semi-periphery. Okay, so tertiary, then those are services provided. So that corn then, right? That corn is then turned into a product at the plant, and then somebody has to sell it. So my friend Rob, who literally sat in this classroom many moons ago, his job is he sells that cereal. Right? He makes a lot of money selling cereal and other products, right? So his job is a service. He's providing a service. He's selling that good to somebody else. He interacts with others, right? He gives them knowledge. He trains them. Okay, that's a tertiary economic activity, right? Salespeople are tertiary economic activity. Most of America, most developed countries, the people are in tertiary economic activities. Okay, so as far as that story goes with my dad's job on the railroad was to transport that food, right? And so his job was, he was a switchman, right? So just like when you're a little kid, you had like Thomas the Train toys, right? And you had the tracks and you could pull a little switch and it would move the train this way. And then the train would go to the right instead of straight. Well, my dad would do that. That was his job with real trains. He was a switchman, right? So one day while he was working, he was riding on a boxcar going from the rail yard's huge place, right? He was riding from one part of the rail yard to the other, which you would normally do because it would get you there faster than walking. So it was real cold outside, and he had like work boots on, and he worked there for like 34 years or something like that. He'd been there a long time. And he stepped off of the train car. And when he stepped off of the train car, there were rocks, like the tracks were elevated a little bit, so there was a little bit of a ridge, and the rocks were all slick because it was super cold. It was March the 4th, and it was really, really cold. So his feet went out from underneath him, and his back went boom across the rail. Okay, so literally, like the rails are going this way, he was laying this way. Okay, and the wheels were coming at him. So he threw himself in between the gauges on the rails, and he was like this. Okay, but he was a big guy. He's kind of like me, probably a little thicker through here. And so he was laying like this, and he had on like a snow suit, like an old school snowsuit that you wear outside. And the wheel went by, and it grabbed his arm. Okay, and literally pulled his arm over the rail and went. The wheels of a train, if you've ever seen the wheels of a train, went like this. Okay, and literally cut his arm off like right here. Okay, it barely left anything at all. So he waited for the wheels to go by. He got hit in a few other places, but that was the only thing that got torn off. The only thing. So then he flipped himself out from underneath it, right? So when he does that, okay, everybody sees this, right? The yard master, okay, he sees this whole thing going on. And so he runs down there. He knows first aid. He knows all this stuff. And he puts a tourniquet on my dad. He saved my dad's life, right? He puts a tourniquet on him, keeps him there. The ambulance and the hospital workers, they get there. Eventually, it takes a while, but they get there. Okay. Now, the next economic activity involved here is quaternary, right? So finance, insurance, and real estate, right, is the quaternary stuff. Those are the big ones. That's not all of them, but those are the big ones. So a good way to remember it, right? Finance, insurance, and real estate, right? FIRE. So now the insurance people for the railroad, they're going to be there to, as soon as they realize what happens to my dad, they're going to be there and say, oh my goodness. Okay. And so the finance people, you're going to have attorneys, you're going to have tax lawyers, you're going to have all these people now because my dad got hurt so bad at work, right? There's insurance bills at the hospital. Okay. There's all of a sudden, there's all kinds of quaternary people that come into play here, right? Because of my dad's injury, right? So they take my dad to the hospital. He's amazing. Okay. My dad he passed away a few years ago, but he's an unbelievable human. He stayed conscious the whole time. He was never knocked out. And when they got to the hospital, they're rolling him through the lobby, and he insisted that they called my mom while he was laying there before they took him in for surgery or to knock him out. And he told them to tell my mom that he was going to live, but he was hurt real bad, and that she needed to stay calm, and have one of the boys, which would have been us, drive her over to the hospital. So then they wheeled him in. He survived another 25 years after that accident, and was amazing person, right? He was right-handed, lost his right arm. Try tying your shoes with one hand, left-handed, right? Or your opposite hand. He did all that, right? He put his clothes on, did everything himself, right? You can never say that you can't do something. He proves that you can do whatever you want if you set your mind to it. He was an amazing, amazing guy. And I can talk to you guys more about him in person, but man, when he set his mind to do something, he did it. So, okay. Now we got to get to the fifth one, right? So you've got primary, right? That was the farmer. You got the secondary. That's the cereal maker. Okay. You got the tertiary, the people that sell the cereal. Okay. You got quaternary jobs that when my dad gets hurt at work, all of a sudden all these things kick in, right? Even the training of the yard master, right? He's got special training. That's a quaternary job. And then quinary is the decision makers, right? The executives. So now the executives of the railroad got to say, okay, how do we want to handle this? Okay, attorneys have to be hired because the injury was so bad. Who was at fault, right? Somebody has to make all those decisions. Those are quinary jobs, right? Now, you go up and if you're the executive, right, you're going to be making more money, okay, than the people below you because you're making those decisions, right? You're getting paid the big bucks to make those decisions. So that's a quinary economic activity, right? So those are the 5 economic sectors, and those are all examples. Now, spatially around the world, okay, that also plays a part, right? So if I go to the next screen, if it allows me, there we go. All right, so I told you a story about my dad. All right, so how are these sectors spatially distributed? So let me pause and I'll come back to this. All right, so it picks back up here. We're going to play this video for you because this does a great job of explaining things spatially across the globe. So let's check it out. Maybe. All right, now it doesn't want to work, but it did a minute ago.
So let's look at some examples.
Okay.
And we have this fantastic map, right, that's been animated for us. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that if you were to look at the world.
Okay, that doesn't work. So it doesn't work if I go full screen, but I'll just go
through
with
a regional, scale of analysis, right? We've got this world map, but remember, we're going to look at this by country data, right? We see that countries like Democratic Republic of Congo, a lot of rare earths, a lot of mining. The Philippines, very famous for fishing. In Brazil, forestry, right? The lumber that comes out of the rainforest. We can see that these areas of the world are very, very heavily engaged in the primary sector of employment. Now, when we start thinking about factories, everybody sees, made in China. We know that a lot of our, gadgets and, things like the smartphones. But also think about clothing. Bangladesh is one of the largest countries in the world in terms of output of manufactured clothing items. Mexico making a lot of cars. A lot of U.S. car companies have shifted operations into Mexico, taking advantage of cheap labor, particularly as part of that United States-Mexico-Canada agreement, the successor to the old NAFTA free trade agreement. And then we think about tertiary. All of your bigger, richer economies in the world are heavily dominated in the service sector.
core
Something
countries.
Like 2/3 of the U.S. economy is based on service sector employment. So you see this in Europe, you're going to see this in the US and Canada. To some degree, you'll see it in all of the richer countries of the world.
The core countries.
And when we think about quaternary, and especially when we think about quinary levels of work, we're going to see that the major headquarters, the front offices of companies, the accounting divisions of companies, these are going to be based in some of the largest cities of the world, in the tallest buildings, where they can network and control this vast array of their multinational corporations.
Okay, so that's a great visual of how this is spatially distributed. Okay, so again, that's just how this works. So like, Nike headquarters are in the United States. So those are the quinary jobs, right? The quaternary jobs, they're here. Even the tertiary jobs, selling the Nike and Foot Locker. Okay, but making them doesn't happen here. That happens in a secondary economic activity somewhere else, like in Bangladesh. Okay, or Malaysia, or wherever they make Nikes, right? So that's how that works. Okay, all right. So if I go back here, this takes me back to here, and I know I can go and do this. So the next step in this, right? So patterns in the globalized economy. So labor costs are typically in the cheaper places, like the periphery countries, like in Bangladesh, like he mentioned in the video. Okay, but innovation in transportation has changed all that. It didn't used to be like that. Like even when I was your age, it wasn't that way. Okay, products can be made far, far away, right? So what they figured out, right, is a way to make things more efficient, right? And let me show you what I mean by making them more efficient, right? So Project Cargo shows these boxes, right, that you can see the water in the background there. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like, right? And this little invention really changed a lot of stuff. Okay, so if you look at these cranes, right, what the cranes do is they pick up the cargo off of the boats and they take them and they put them right on a truck and the truck just drives off. Or they take them and they put them right on a train and they'll load up an entire train, and that train then will go from New York City, a break of bulk center, or Charleston, South Carolina, a break of bulk center, or Antwerp in Amsterdam or the Netherlands, and that's a break of bulk center that will take things all throughout Europe. Okay, because you got those enormous cargo ships that come in and then they take that stuff off and they know exactly where that's going. Well, now you don't need guys to unload boxes, which ironically, that was my dad's first job on the railroad in East St. Louis. His job was to get boxcars that came into East St. Louis. It was a break of bulk center. You took them off the train. He would take the boxes, put them onto trucks. The trucks then would ship them out, just like Amazon does today. Okay, so these cargo things made for break of bulk, right? Let's watch a little more. Okay, then you can see those things drive away on the truck, right? And you can see the huge boat that was over here, and then there's that whole crane operating system. Okay, again, that's a break of bulk center, and those things, okay, whoops, those things reduces the need for human labor. That crane does all the work. It's all mechanized, right? It's all digital. They can set it a computer and tell this crane to go pick up, box number 46 and put it on to, train number 6, right? It makes it way faster and cheaper for us to ship goods around the world, which is why if you own a clothing company like Nike, you can put a factory in Bangladesh, have them make your shoes, okay, and the labor is real cheap, like $2 an hour, if not cheaper than that. We're talking about $15 an hour in the United States, but in a place like Bangladesh, the labor is so cheap, those people will take a job for $2 or $3 an hour. So then they make that stuff there. The labor is so cheap, they put it on that boat. That boat is able to take it to a break of bulk center in the United States, whether that is in Los Angeles or San Diego or Seattle, okay, or New York or Charleston, South Carolina, or Houston. And then they get that stuff into the shore. Those cranes take it and move it all around. It's way more efficient and it's way less expensive. Okay, now remember all that because that's going to matter, right? That innovation in transportation, okay, that boat, that crane, all this stuff you see, that's within the last 25 years. That's all changed. So the globalized world, if you remember that word, okay, globalization, that globalized world is happening here through trade, all right? Okay, so where do you put your factory? Okay, is it material oriented, right? Bulk reducing. You build it close to the raw material, okay, if that's the case, right? If it's market oriented, it's bulk gaining. That means it gets heavier when you make it, okay? Then you build it close to the market. It costs more money to ship it, okay, than it does the finished product. So if you're making something, okay, in Bangladesh, it either has to be bulk neutral, okay, or bulk reducing, right? Because you got to be able to put it on the boat, okay, and then send it across, right? So car manufacturers, he mentioned Mexico in that little video. The reason why they're doing that stuff in Mexico is because cars are heavy. So you want to be able to transport them close to the market. And it didn't used to be that way, but it is now. They're building that stuff in Mexico, or they're even building it in the United States because the transportation is that much cheaper now inside the US, okay, than what it used to be. Okay, so where do you build your factory-produced goods, right? Other factors besides where the market is and where the raw material comes from. Those are big factors, right? So where the raw material comes from and where the market's at are huge factors. Other factors are the cost of labor, which is why Nike will shift stuff all the way over to Southeast Asia somewhere to make things. The other one is agglomeration, okay, or clustering. So you put numerous businesses that are similar in the same place to save on shipping costs. So Detroit, okay, Detroit has got car manufacturers. They've got General Motors. They've got Ford. Okay, they used to have Chrysler. All that stuff's a part of General Motors now. So all of those car places are in the same spot. So they have all the shipping to send that stuff out across the country. All of it's right there in Detroit. Well, if you're ordering all the parts, it's cheaper to those car companies to order them together and send them all to the same place. Okay, that's agglomeration. So their costs of production go down because they have so many like businesses in the same place. Okay, so there's a least cost theory. Okay, Weber's least cost theory. Companies choose their location to minimize cost, right? So one of his core assumptions is that firms will choose a location in order to keep their costs down. They're gonna choose the most cost-efficient place to build their product. Of course they are. They want to make as much money as they possibly can. Okay, so they want to build. Here, I got another review here. So according to Weber, right, the market is good for a good at one location. The resources for the good are at 2 separate locations. Okay, so those are the points on the triangle, right? So here's the market, here's where the raw materials are, right? If either raw material is heavy, Okay, you don't want to ship it too far to get it to the market. Okay, you want the lightest possible transportation costs. So if the raw material is heavy, then you want to transport the raw material so that you can make the product closer to the market. Excuse me, if the finished product is heavy, you want it to be closer to the market. Okay, so if either raw material is heavy, you don't want to ship it too far. So if the raw material is really heavy, you want the factory near the raw material. Steel is a great example. Okay, the coal and the iron ore to make steel near Pittsburgh, that's the reason why Pittsburgh is where it's at, right? The factory is where it's at because you took the coal out of the ground in West Virginia and southern or western Pennsylvania, and you took the iron ore out of the ground. Those things are heavy. You could get them to Pittsburgh, and in Pittsburgh, then you could have the factories that made the steel and the iron, and then you had railroads that helped with transportation, and you had the rivers that would help ship things across the country. Okay, so soda or beer are good examples, right? So the raw materials for those are really light, but the finished product is heavy. So Anheuser-Busch, okay, a beer manufacturer, they have their plants all around the country, St. Louis being one of them. Okay, so they produce it in St. Louis, but they ship it regionally. They don't ship the beer made in St. Louis to Alaska because that'd be too expensive because it's a bulk gaining product. Okay, so the ingredients that go into a beer aren't very heavy, but when you put it all together and you make the 12-ounce can of beer and you put it in a case, right, now to ship it is more expensive because of its weight. So in that case, okay, you would want your market. In that case, you want your factory close to the market because beer and soda, those are bulk gaining products. Okay, they're bulk gaining products. All right, so an ethanol plant is a great example. Okay, it's in Iowa. Okay, so it's close to the raw material, right? Because the raw material is heavier than the finished product. Okay, it's actually a bulk reducing product. Ethanol is. The biofuel is not that heavy. And so the cost of transportation, you can see all those rail cars right there to ship that stuff. The cost of transportation isn't that bad. So you have the plant closer to the raw material because the corn itself is heavier than the ethanol. Okay, all right. So if the raw material is heavy, you want the plant near the raw material. The opposite is true as well. If the raw material is light, you can then have the factory further away from the market. Okay. All right. So I think that brings us to the end of that. It does, right? So let's go back to the beginning. Okay. And so explain spatial patterns. We did that with the map of the world of industrial production and development, right? So the different economic sectors, that's a story about my dad. And then labor, transportation, which includes shipping containers, like I showed you in that quick little video. The break of bulk, which was also in that video, that's a break of bulk center. The least cost theory, markets and resources influence the location. So the least cost theory is the Weber's triangle. You want your factory in the place that it's going to cost you the least to produce it, right? And then core, semi-periphery, and periphery countries is where those economic activities take place. All right. That is the end of 7.2.